Hakan Hocam kaydı başlatıp dökümü durduruyorum. Doğru değil mi?
Evet hocam, şu anda kayıt başlamış durumda.
Tamamdır, süper. Ki bu arada sunum dili İngilizce olarak mı devam ediyoruz?
Nasıl isterseniz.
Tamam, tamamdır. Okay. O zaman sizin uygun olduğunuz bir zamanda başlayabiliriz.
Tamam.
Benim için problem yok.
15.30 demiştik hocalarım. Herkes için uygunsa başlayabiliriz diye düşünüyorum. Bugün Sabancı Üniversitesi'nden Doktor Emrehan Aktuğ hocamızı misafir ediyoruz. Ben öncelikle kendisinin çalışmalarına ve özgeçmişine ait kısa bir girizgah yapmak istiyorum. Sonra sözü kendisine bırakacağım. Doktor Emrehan Aktuğ 2011 yılında İstanbul Erkek Lisesi ve 2015 yılında Sabancı Üniversitesi elektrik mühendisliği mi diyorsunuz hocam?
Evet,
Elektrik
mühendisliği.
mühendisliği mezun olmuştur. Daha sonra ekonomi alanında Boğaziçi Üniversitesi ve University of Texas at Austin olmak üzere 2 yüksek lisansın ardından 2022 yılında yine University of Texas at Austin'de ekonomi alanındaki doktorasını tamamlamış ve aynı yıl Eylül ayından itibaren de Sabancı Üniversitesi'nde ekonomi bölümünde doktor öğretim üyesi olarak görev yapmaya başlamıştır. Çalışma alanları arasında makroekonomi, parasal iktisat, hesaplamalı iktisat, computational economics, uygulamalı makroekonomi ve makrofinans bulunmaktadır. Güncel olarak üzerinde çalışmakta olduğu çok sayıda working paper'ın yanı sıra Empirical Economics gibi önemli dergilerde yayınlanmış çalışmaları ve yürütmekte olduğu TÜBİTAK projeleri bulunmaktadır. Bugün kendisi bize daha sanırım yazım süreci devam eden değil mi hocam?
Evet, evet.
Ve enflasyonist bir ortamda Türkiye'deki firmaların firma davranışları, borçlanma kararları ve beklentilerini inceledikleri Inflation Expectations and Firms Decisions in High Inflation, Evidence from a Randomized Control Trial başlıklı çalışmalarını sunacaktır. Genç bir meslektaşım olarak ben kendisine davetimizi kabul ettiği ve işbirliği için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Eklemek istediğiniz bir nokta varsa hocam, buradan itibaren sözü size bırakıyorum. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be here and, having a chance to present my paper. This is the second time I am presenting this paper, therefore I am quite excited. And, feel free to ask any questions. Feel free to interrupt anytime you want, because at this point we need feedback. Yeah, definitely. That's the case. Therefore, feel free to ask any questions. It can be clarifying questions, or it can be any feedback on the paper as well. But do not hesitate to ask any questions and interrupt me at any point in the presentation. Okay, let me start. If you are all ready, as the name suggests, actually this is an experimental research, and in this research, actually, we conducted an information RCT, and I will explain what exactly information RCT is. Okay, first, of course, I will explain the setting, and I will, motivate the paper. I will talk about the possible research questions, and then I will explain the methodology in detail, and then I will explain the main findings of the paper. Okay, the motivation is actually easy. In macro, expectations are crucial. Why? Because we know that it is part of decision-making process of both households and firms. And, when modeling, we see these expectations everywhere, from Phillips curve to Euler equation, from asset pricing equations, in, policy rules like Taylor rule, in Tobin's Q, it is everywhere. But the thing is that, it is empirically quite challenging to identify the causal impact of these expectations on the, decisions of, households and firms. That is the main problem in the literature, okay, we see that, in models, these are important, but empirically it is quite hard to find, evidence for these channels. And particularly in high inflation, the evidence is even more scarce, because there is not much countries with high inflation, as we all know. And, this is a relatively recent literature. Therefore, there is not much work on it. And to our knowledge, this is the, first information RCT in a high inflation setting. And, inflation is quite high. At the time of the RCT, it was around 75%. It was, I think, 7 months ago we did it. And, the annual inflation was around 75. It is, of course, declining right now. But the thing is that, in today's standards, this is quite high. It is unacceptably high. The thing is that, this is the first RCT in such a setting. And here I say RCT because I say information RCT because, again, there are control groups, there are treatment groups, and the treatment here is that just publicly available information, We provide, these several pieces of information to these treated groups. We treat them with these information and then follow these firms, okay? And then estimate the impact of these treatments on these treated firms compared to control group, and to which we do not give any information at all. Okay, there are treatment groups who receive publicly available information from us, and there is some control group who didn't receive any information. And over time, we basically observe how these two groups behave differently. We basically estimate the dynamic impact of these treatment, in the following months. And, here we discussed that, the RCT was basically conducted in May 2024. And, then in the subsequent 3-4 months, we basically tracked them and we tried to estimate the impact of these information treatments. Okay. And we basically, as the last point states, we basically examine the causal impact of these expectations in the sense that by using these information treatments, we basically, exogenously create exogenous variation in the inflation expectations of these firms. Okay, and I will show how. Cool. And in this setting, what are the research questions? I think these are actually the first questions that come to our mind when we think about firms' decision-making process. How do these inflation expectations shape firms' price setting and wage decisions? What are the impact on the borrowing behavior of these firms? Is there a question?
No,
okay.
I guess.
I see. Okay. What are the impact on the credit costs? How it changes the liability composition of these firms? And at the same time, we will try to understand how the changes in inflation expectations impact the real outcomes of these firms as well. Okay, and at the end, we will discuss, is it related to the relationship between the inflation and pessimism? We will provide evidence for that as well. Okay, let me give you some spoiler. Okay, these are the main findings. I will explain them in detail, but just let me go over them very fast. First, we found a significant pass-through rates in expectations from inflation expectation, aggregate inflation expectation of firms to wage and price expectations of these firms. These firms are asked basically, in the next 12 months, how much are you expecting to change your wages? How much do you expect to change your prices? These are, some questions in the survey, and we can measure the impact. And we found that the change in, inflation expectations changes these wages and price expectations as well. And the pass-through rate is quite high. It is around 60%. It is much higher compared to, developed countries, for example. In developed countries, this number is around 20%. It is much lower, and people actually are surprised why this is the case. In Turkey, because of this high inflation, probably firms are much more attentive. Therefore, a change in aggregate inflation expectation lead to an increase in wage and firm level wage and price expectations as well. And we also found, there is an increase in the total borrowing, and this increase is basically refinancing from short term to long term. Whenever there is an increase in inflation expectations, basically, induced by these treatments. Whenever there is such an increase in inflation expectation, we see an impact on the credit usage. A 10 percentage point increase in inflation expectation leads to a 3 percentage point rise in credit usage. The logic is that these firms try to lock in the current rates because they know that, okay, right now actually they learn that there is going to be higher inflation. There is going to be higher inflation. Their inflation expectation has gone up. As a result of that, they think that, okay, inflation will be higher in the future. I will lock in the current rates on the borrowing cost such that, there is going to be debt erosion impact of the inflation in the near future. And therefore, we see an increase in the long-term financing by locking in the current rates and decrease in the short-term financing. We will show the results. And as I said, the main motivation here is that for the firms, if you expect higher inflation, you are trying to lock in the current low long-term rates in anticipation of further inflation, which basically leads to deep debt erosion impact, debt erosion channel in the near future for this debt. Okay, and this is basically refinancing channel that we call. And lastly, we also checked the real impact, and we found that there is a significant decline in the sales and investment of these firms because firms associate these higher inflation rates with worse economic outlook. Basically, they see the economy from stagflationary viewpoint. Okay, that is another finding, I guess, which is quite crucial for the policy making. If firms, associate these higher inflation with worse economic outlook, meaning that they, expect economy to perform not well in the future if they have higher inflation expectations, we basically expect, lower sale from them, and this is the case. They basically decrease their, expected sales if they increase their inflation expectations. Okay, and I'm talking about these RCT, but how did we do that exactly? Let me talk about that. Actually, it is a part of these regular survey, İktisadi yönelim anketi, business tendencies statistics. I guess there is such a, regular survey nearly conducted since 2005, I guess. And, these are firms. There are, I guess, 2,000 firms in each survey wave. And this is conducted monthly at the monthly frequency. And, this is a panel data. They follow the firms. They ask these same questions every month. Additionally, on top of these business tendencies survey, we basically conducted these additional small survey, which basically we call RCT survey. This is done in May 2024, and there were nearly 65% response rate by these firms. Therefore, we have a sample of 1,200 firms. And, we gave some information related to central bank projections, professional forecasts, and also inflation target of the central bank. Okay, these are the information that we gave to these firms. Of course, we divide these firms into 5 groups, 5 equal group, roughly 250 observation in each group. The firm control group doesn't receive any information, as I told you. The other 4 treatment groups receive different pieces of information. Okay, I will give you the details regarding the information, but that is the setting. Okay, we give these. We have conducted this nearly 5-minute survey, 5 minutes RCT survey, and in this survey we divide these firms into 5 different groups. 4 of these groups receive different pieces of information. Okay, and I think the main advantage of doing this with central bank is that you can match this data with the firm level administrative data. We basically match this survey with many other administrative sources like credit registry, balance sheets of these firms, employment and wage data, and even B2B sales of these firms. Okay, and therefore, since we can match this survey data with these administrative sources, we can follow the dynamic impact of these treatments. Okay, and this is the procedure. We conducted this survey just 2 days after BTS. Okay, BTS, as I said, it is conducted at the monthly frequency, and of course there was a May 2024 version of BTS as well, İktisat yönelim anketi. And just 2 days after this survey, May edition of this survey, we conducted this, 5 to 8 minutes special purpose, RCT survey. And then, of course, we tracked the following month's survey as well. The thing is that actually these guys, these firms have quite dispersed inflation expectations. Okay, that is the thing here. This is 12 months ahead inflation expectations of these firms. This is the left-hand side, basically shows the BTS 2024 May edition, okay, the regular survey. As you can see, there is not much difference between these distributions. And this is the RCT survey. The red line is basically the expectations in the RCT survey. And you can see how it differs from the other waves. Basically, when you give information, these guys change about the future inflation rates. Okay, it works basically, and I will show it of course statistically as well. But the thing is that this is, as you can see, the expectations are quite dispersed. Mean inflation expectation is around 58%. And the thing is that there is significant difference between the 10th percentile and 19th percentile. And this is not just about inflation expectations. These expectations are all over the place for other variables as well. When you check the real sale growth expectation, the 10th percentile nearly expects quite negative number, minus 16%. The 19th percentile expects, a quite large number, 36% of real sale growth. Okay, I mean, I'm giving you these numbers because I just want to mention that there is significant variation in the data. Therefore, when we, use these treatments and create some exogenous variation, we can capture the, impact much more clearly compared to, for example, developed countries. And, I already explained the setting, but I think it is good to visualize things. Here, this is the, stages of the RCT basically. You basically first get the prior expectations of these firms before giving the information, of course. We will, use it as a control. Then we give the information, no information to control group, the information to these treated groups. And then we basically measure their posterior expectations. And we will, from this, we will identify the impact of the treatment on the, inflation expectations. Okay, and afterwards, of course, after getting this exogenous change in the inflation expectations, we will try to understand the impact of these changes on the ex-post decisions of these firms. Okay, and sorry, this is a bit crowded, but these are the exact wording of these questions. Okay, of course, it is provided in Turkish. When we did the experiment, but the thing is that this is the exact translation. The first one is just a publicly available information, as I said. This is piyasa katılımcıları anketi, market participants survey. In that survey, we just picked the May 2024 edition, and in that one, the expectation of these, market participants is around 33%. Okay, we just gave this piece of information to the treatment group 1. Okay, to the second treatment group, we give the other forecast by the central bank this time. Okay, central bank has inflation report in the May 2024 edition. We see that this is the prediction of the central bank for the end of year is annual inflation expectation is 38%. We gave this information to the second group. To the third group, we gave the exact same information nearly, but just for 2025. Of course, the number in that case is lower, but this is the other piece of information that we gave to these groups. And the last one is just the central bank inflation target. Okay, 5%. Of course, we just try to measure the credibility here because we didn't hit this target for many years. Actually, we haven't ever hit it, with this 5%. Therefore, in a sense, there is some credibility question regarding that. But we see that even giving this information works. Okay. And this is the, basically regression model to understand the impact of these treatments. Okay. Here, the posterior basically stands for posterior inflation expectation. Okay, the inflation expectation that we got after the treatment. Prior expectation is basically the expectation just before the treatment. Okay, and this is the 4 different treatments that we gave. Therefore, this is from 1 to 4. We interacted with prior. Of course, we also control for the treatment dummy itself as well. But the here coefficient of interest here is that this one. Okay, We control for prior, we control for the dummy itself. The thing is that, we try to understand, given this prior, how this treatment changes the posterior. Okay, that is the coefficient of interest. And we expect that to be negative because, these firms have very high inflation expectations. And, these are the numbers that we gave. It is 33, 38, 14, even 5%. These are different pieces, of course, but, these numbers are much lower compared to their expectations. And we expect these treatments to, to decrease the expectations of these firms. Okay, and this is what we got. This is the CPI inflation expectation. This is PPI inflation expectation. We got the result for both of them. This is the coefficient in front of the prior mean. Theoretically, normally, if FIRE holds, meaning that if full information rational expectations hold, we would expect to see coefficient of 1 for the prior mean. Why? Because these are just publicly available information. If full information holds, these firms should be already aware of the existence of this information. Okay? Therefore, this information, this publicly available information, shouldn't play any role, shouldn't change the expectations of these firms. But, when we did it, we see that it is close to 1, but it is not exactly equal to 1. The more important thing here is that we see a negative impact for the treated groups. These treated groups, basically respond back to these pieces of informations. Okay, they decrease their inflation expectations after receiving these information treatments. Okay, these are the coefficients of interest, as I said, and these significant negative results basically suggest that these treatments work. Okay, giving these information to these firms works. That's good, and we control for everything. But since this is an RCT and we just randomize the groups, actually, even if you do not control the group, since the sample is already randomized, you should see a similar impact. And we provided the robustness for that actually. Even if we just exclude all the controls, because of the randomization, these impacts are nearly same. Cool. And this is just visually to explain things here. Here, this is the control group. Normally, as I said, in a theoretical, my prior was that just to see an overlap between the red line and blue line. Blue line is the prior inflation expectation. Okay, blue line is the 45-degree line. Red line is the fitted line for the control group for the relationship between posterior inflation expectation and prior inflation expectation. Normally, since just few days passed, you would expect to see all these points to align with the 45-degree line. Why? Because let's say you have 50% inflation expectation in mid-May, in 25th of May, you need to tell me again a very similar number because you didn't receive any information from me. But of course, in reality, you have different information sources as well. Therefore, in these 10 days, you might change your belief slightly. Therefore, we see a slight change in the slope of the red line, which is basically the fitted line for the control group. The thing here is that I think for us, this was our aim actually, to change the slope of these red line for the treatment groups. Okay, and these are the different treatment groups. We gave these information to these groups, and then when we try to understand the relationship between the prior expectation and posterior expectation, as you can see, this slope is much flatter. Okay, as expected from here. This is basically the slope of the control group. This red line. Since we decrease the slope of these, fitted line for these treatment groups, we see these, flatter red slopes, flatter red lines for these treatment groups. Okay, this basically suggests that our treatments work. Okay, cool. That is good, and this is all, shown on the exact same graph. This is again prior expectation of these firms versus posterior expectations of these firms. As you can see, for the control group, it is quite close to 45-degree line as expected. They shouldn't change their expectation in just few days. These guys, who receive the information, different information, you can see that there is significant change. Okay, these guys change their expectations whenever they received information regarding, future inflation. Okay, and after, of course, that was our initial aim, to create exogenous changes in these inflation expectations, and then now we want to understand the impact of these changes on the firm's decisions. Okay, for that we run this regression model, which is used a lot actually in the last few years. The in Koibin 2022 paper is one example of that. He's actually my advisor as well, and he ran this regression model to understand the impact of these exogenous changes on the firm level outcome. Here, T plus H is basically, I is the firm, T plus H is the horizon, and right-hand side, the post is basically posterior inflation expectation, prior is basically prior inflation expectations. These are control, these are sector fixed effect, these are province fixed effect, and that is the model. The thing here is that we care about these beta 1 coefficient here, meaning that whenever there is a change in their posterior expectations, how this is reflected on the firm level variable. And these firm level variables are, we first check the quantitative expectations of these firms. As I said in the survey, we asked, how much are you going to change your wages? How much are you going to change your, how much do you think your unit cost will increase in the next 12 months? How much do you think your prices will increase in the next 12 months? Yeah, that was the exact wording. And we get these, expectations of these firms. We first try to understand the impact on these expectations compared to control group. And then by tracking these firms over the subsequent 3-4 months, we try to understand the impact on the credit, the borrowing behavior, the employment, wages, sales, purchases of these firms. Okay, but the critical thing here is that we create exogenous inflation expectation, exogenous variation here, and using these exogenous variation, we will try to understand the causal relation between the inflation expectation and the and the outcome variables that are listed here. Okay, for that, of course, we run this experiment. There is normally significant endogeneity between the expectation and the firm level behavior, but that is the beauty of this treatment. We just create this exogenous variation, and we need to use it, of course. For that, we instrument these posterior expectation using these treatments and the interaction variable. Okay, meaning that we try to capture, using these treatment setting, using this RCT setting, we are trying to capture the exogenous variation in these posterior inflation expectations, and using that, we will try to understand the causal link between these expectations and these outcome variables. And we run these regressions for all these outcome variables that you can see here. First, we checked the expectations, the impact on the expectations, and we see a significant pass-through from inflation expectations to these firm level expectations. Okay, this is aggregate inflation expectation, and there is a change in the aggregate inflation expectations, but this is reflected as a significant increase in firm level wage expectation, unit cost expectation, and own price expectation. These are quite, as I said, large numbers, nearly 60%, and which is much higher compared to the low inflation environment, because these are recent papers. They found around 25% pass through, and one other paper actually found no significant relationship between these expectations at all. Okay, therefore it seems like firms in high inflation environment, they are quite attentive, and whenever see there is a change in the aggregate inflation, they basically change their own firm level expectations as well. Okay, and that basically creates the a strong link between the aggregate expectations and firm level expectations. And these are the actual regressions here. These are the pass-through rates: 58, 53, 55. As we discussed, it is all these are the wage, unit cost, and price expectations. The thing is that there is significant discrepancy between the by firm size as well. For the large firm, the effect is there, but for small firm, actually the pass-through is much higher. Probably these firms, they are much less confident in their expectation formation compared to large firms. Therefore, whenever they receive such an information and they change their aggregate inflation expectation, this is nearly directly reflected on their wage level, firm level expectations as well. Okay, probably that is our hypothesis to explain this large difference between the large firms and small firms regarding the pass-through rates. Okay, that is the thing here, and we now have to understand the borrowing behavior of these firms as well. And regarding the borrowing behavior, there can be several channels because these expectations are quite important for them, and they impact their investment decision, they impact their inventory decisions, and they of course impact their borrowing decisions as well. And the thing is that we think that this might happen through 4 channels. There might be 4 different channels that these inflation expectations can impact these borrowing decisions of these firms. The first one is working capital channel. These firms with high inflation expectations might want to reduce their short-term credit demand because they might want to cut employment cost, and these are often funded by the short-term credit lines. Okay. The other thing is that they might change their investment demand as a result of that. Because of the higher inflation, higher uncertainty, they might want to lower their investment, and this might reduce the need for long-term credit. That is another one. There might be precautionary reallocation channel in the sense that these firms who expect higher inflation expectations might think that, okay, in this uncertain environment, I might want to shift from short-term debt to long-term debt to better manage my cash flows. Okay, because of the uncertainty, I want to they might want to shift to short-term debt because of the uncertainty regarding the future. The last channel is that which we think the most important here. These firms with heightened inflation expectations might want to lock in current rates before future inflation impacts, which is basically if inflation will be higher, the costs will be higher, and therefore firms need to update their pricing decisions and any other decisions related to that. The thing is that if there is an exogenous increase in the initial expectations of this firm, they might want to use this knowledge to lock in current rates before the future rate hikes. Okay, and using these channels, we will try to interpret the results basically. Okay, these are possible theoretical channels. Prior to running the model, we do not know which one will work, and after running the model, we try to make sense of the results by using these by making sense of these different channels in this context. The thing is that the results are like this actually. This is the dynamic impact. This is the impact on the first month, second month, third month, and the 4th month after the treatment. Okay, this is basically June, July, August, and September. And this is the impact on credit. This basically says that this is the posterior inflation expectation. This basically says that whenever there is an increase in the inflation expectation of firm, induced by this treatment, these firms tend to increase their credit. Okay. The thing is that when we check the borrowing costs, it says that it is negative. Normally, the supply hasn't changed. Suddenly, because of these exogenous variation, these firms increase their demand for the credit. Normally, you would expect to see an increase in the borrowing cost as well because of the higher demand. But I will explain later on, this is because of the shift from short-term borrowing to long-term borrowing. Okay, I will explain this. And we also have access to their foreign exchange transactions. Whenever they increase their inflation expectation, just to hedge against the this inflation, they basically increase their foreign currency holding. Okay, they buy more FX foreign currencies, and they are they basically decrease their currency sales in the FX market. Okay, this basically means that they want to hold for more foreign currency in case they increase their inflation expectations after these treatments. Okay, the thing is that I'm going to explain that just right now. This is just, actually I need to show it right now, sorry for that. As I said, there is an impact, positive impact on the credit, but negative impact on the borrowing cost. This is because of the, shift from short-term credit to long-term credit. This is the impact on the long-term credit amount. You can see the positive impact. This is the impact on the short-term credit. You can see that it is either insignificant or negative. The thing is that, if this demand channel works, we need to see a positive impact on the borrowing cost for the long-term financing, which is the case here. And if this is negative, and if this is a demand channel, which should be, as I said, there is no change in the supply side, at the bank side. It is all about the change in the inflation expectations of these firms. Therefore, it should be demand side. And we see a negative impact on the short-term credit and negative impact on the short-term borrowing cost. This basically means that there is a lower demand for short-term credit, there is a higher demand for long-term credit, and at the end of the day, we see at the aggregate, we see an increase in the total amount of credit, but at a decreased cost. And why is that? The thing is that, in Turkey at the time, the long-term credit rates are basically lower compared to the short-term credit rates. Okay, therefore, whenever there is such a compositional shift towards long-term financing, the total borrowing cost of these firms decline. They basically lock in for the current rates on the long-term rate, long-term financing, and then when we look at the total credit and total borrowing cost, this is what we see. Okay, and yeah, that is the thing here. Yeah. These are the numbers. The average long-term financing cost is 48%. For the short-term cost, it is 52%. And we basically claim that higher demand for these long-term credit drives down the average costs. And the thing is that this basically suggests that this refinancing channel is in play here. The other thing, of course, there is short-term borrowing decline as well. Therefore, this might basically reflect the reduced need for working capital due to anticipated lower employment cost. This might have an impact as well. But we basically, by looking at the numbers, we just claim that the refinancing channel is the major driver, and firms basically tend to extend their debt maturities. These working capital channel might play some role because of these reduced short-term credit demand, but this is minimal compared to this one. Okay, it seems like these refinancing to long-term borrowing, long-term credits is the major factor driving these results. Okay, and also, as I said, they try to hedge against these domestic inflation as well. As a result of that, they tend to increase their FX purchases and they tend to decrease their FX sales. Okay, this is expected. This is a common behavior in emerging markets. Whenever, suddenly, as I said, I say suddenly because in just 5-minute survey, 8-minute survey, whatever, we gave these information pieces, and these firms basically update their inflation expectations, and we call it, this is what we call, creating exogenous variation in the inflation expectations of these firms. And after this change, they basically change their behavior in the subsequent month compared to the control group. And these are the results, basically showing that, this is how these treated firms behave compared to control group. Okay, this is the differences compared to control group basically. And therefore, we claim that this is the causal impact of inflation expectation on the firm behavior. Cool. And we also checked the outstanding credit, as a robustness. We see an increase in the total outstanding credit, total long-term credit, a decline in the short-term outstanding credit. And yeah, I think this might be important. We also see an increase in the lira-denominated credit, but it's insignificant change or nearly a decline in the dollar-denominated credit. In the asset side, to hedge against inflation, they basically increase their FX holding, but on the liability side, because of the debt erosion impact of the inflation, they basically, try to increase their lira, local currency denominated credit, and they try to decrease their, dollar-denominated credit. Okay, and right now, for example, we see the, we can think of in the other direction, of course. Right now, inflation expectations of these firms are going down, and as a result, we observe actually an increase in the FX-denominated credit of these firms. Okay, cool. That is the thing here, I guess. Yeah, I already explained that. And yeah, that is the, I think, last thing I'm gonna explain together with the pessimism. We also, after presenting the, evidence for the pass-through to expectations and also on the borrowing behavior of firm, we check the real outcome as well. Of course, this is much more stickier compared to, financing decision or, of course, expectations. Expectations are not sticky at all in a high inflation environment. The thing is that, these real outcomes are much more sticky. Therefore, prior to running the model, you're expecting some results and, we got some results. Of course, it is not as large as the ones that we see in the previous exercises, but it is there. This is the effect on employment. And we see that, the ones with higher inflation expectations tend to decrease their employment. And this is significant. And the impact is nearly gone after 3 months. In the 4th month, we see the impact is nearly gone. But the thing is that, whenever firms basically increase their inflation expectation, they tend to decrease their employment, and this is the result on sale. They tend to decrease their sale. The more important thing here is that maybe, I think not more important, but maybe interesting thing here is that they increase their total purchases in the sense that they know that these, they're trying to accumulate inventory basically. They know that inflation will be higher, therefore they just want to, hoard some inventory. For that, whenever they increase their inflation expectation, compared to control group, they increase their total purchases. And this makes sense to us. Whenever we have seen these positive numbers, actually we said that, okay, this makes sense. Although they look at the future more pessimistic compared to control group, therefore they decrease their employment and sale. They try to increase their purchases because of the anticipated inflation. And of course, because of lastly, the impact on wages should be seen as well. It is there, it is minimally there because, it was in May and, not all wages are updated during the summer. Wages are quite sticky. Therefore, we see some impact, but, it is quite small, but it is there. The positive impact on wages is there. Again, this is the firms with higher inflation expectations move their wages slightly higher compared to control group. Cool. And yeah, that is the thing I'm trying to say here. That is the last table I'm gonna show. As I said, whenever there is an increase in the inflation expectation of this firm, they basically decrease their employment and sale. This is because firms anticipate lower economic activity in the future. They become basically more pessimistic if they increase their inflation expectation. And this is what we call stagflationary view. They read the economic developments from the supply side perspective. They basically say that, okay, if inflation is going up, things are probably going worse. Therefore, future will not be bright. If inflation is going down, things will be better because they basically anticipate higher inflation with lower economic activity since they understand the economic developments from the supply side perspective. The thing is that we see the reflections of these understanding in this table. And actually we want to I already talked about these purchases and inventory management and stuff. I already talked about that. Okay, and that is the last stuff actually regarding these pessimism. The thing here is that, okay, we said that this might be the thing here. If there is a decline in the sale and employment for the ones who have higher inflation expectations, this is basically a 10 percentage point increase in inflation expectation lead to a sizable amount of employment growth, decline in employment growth and sale growth. The thing is that this is sizable in the sense that 10 percentage point is not even a one standard deviation. One standard deviation is in this context is 20 percentage point, meaning that a one standard deviation increase in inflation expectation leads to a 1 percentage point decline in employment growth. Okay, this is compared to control group. This is quite large when you think about it. It is just one standard deviation shock, and you see a significant real impact. The thing is that, we claim that this is because of the stagflation review of the firms and also actually households. We have another study on that. But here the context is, of course, firms. And when we look at it, actually we capture it in the survey again. Here, this is the impact on the firm's own business expectations, firm economic expectations, their thoughts regarding the economic outlook, and their thoughts on credit conditions. Okay. Again, we run the same regression. Whenever there is an increase in the inflation expectations of these firms, they basically, sorry, I should have explained that. This is, of course, a qualitative question, and there are the 3 categories. Basically, firms are asked, in the next 3 months, do you think your firm business will, operate in a better sense? It will stay the same, or it will get worse? And they ask the same question for the economic outlook. Do you think that, the aggregate economy will behave better, will stay the same, or will behave, will perform worse? These are the questions. And here, if it increases, it means that they think it is gonna get worse. Things will be, things will get worse if this coefficient is positive in this, categorical outcome variable. And we see that is the case. Whenever this is posterior mean, again, posterior inflation expectation, we again use these treatments and interaction as the, instrument. And using these exogenous variation in inflation expectation, again, we try to understand the impact on the, these expectations regarding the own business economic expectation and credit condition. And for all these 3, we see that these firms become more pessimistic. We basically see that, if these firms have higher inflation expectations after these treatments, they tend to see the world from a more pessimistic view. And of course, it works in the other direction as well. And that was the case actually in our study. Most firms basically decrease their inflation expectation. Actually, therefore, it's a good news. If they decrease their inflation expectation, the treatments decrease their inflation expectations, and after that, these firms become more optimistic basically, since they associate lower inflation expectation with more economic activity, or higher inflation expectation with lower economic activity. Okay, since they see the world from the supply side view. Okay, therefore, I think that makes sense, and that is consistent with the story. This is consistent with the real economic impact, on the sales and employment, and that is also consistent with the borrowing behavior. Cool, and that was it. We basically run this experiment to capture the changes in the inflation expectation. Normally, this is quite a highly endogenous variable. If you run these expectations on these different variables, you will capture all the endogeneity in the world because there are tons of different co-founders. Of course, here, all we did is that we just changed the inflation expectation with a small piece of information, and we then track these firms to understand how they behave differently compared to control group. And these are the impacts that we have seen in this upcoming months after the treatment. And it seems like the findings are quite consistent with each other, and therefore we believe that overall this evidence supports the stagflation review of the firms towards the economy. Okay. And hopefully in the future research, we will try to understand the role of inflation uncertainty and the second moment effects. But yeah, that's all today from me. If you have any questions, we can discuss, but that's all for today. Let me not.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Your paper seems to have very interesting results. Even though I'm not very much familiar with this kind of studies, I would like to ask you some technicality about regressions. To what extent your results are robust first? And
yeah. Yeah. Move on. Sorry.
No. You can answer, and we can go on.
Yeah, we actually we even run the regression without the controls. As I said, if you did the randomization well in such settings, even without controls, these effects should be there. And we did that, and we presented in the paper. It seems like the results are quite robust to these different specifications.
And I have seen some scatter diagrams. Could you go back to those diagrams, please? Yeah, I think, yeah, this one. In the treatment groups 1, 2, and 3, do you interpret the results as significant here, or are they insignificant?
Here, actually, this is, of course, just the descriptive version of it. We just show these prior versus posterior in a 2D graph. We run the regression here. And when we run the regression, after after having the exact model, this is the coefficient of interest.
Oh, right. So I think confused it with the stuff. Yeah. So I'm sorry that, as I said, I'm not very much familiar with these kind of studies. My questions might remain very irrelevant. Sorry for that.
No. They were all perfect. Thanks.
And I would like to learn, how did you control the firm effects? I can see the firm controls here. So what kind of variable did you use in the regressions here?
Yeah, here these controls are age, size, leverage, and also exporter dummy.
Okay.
And maybe one other. I need to check the paper again. But these four are there: leverage, age, size, and exporter dummy, along with the sector fixed effect and province fixed effect.
Okay, so the most of the regressions are like binary regressions, right? Logistic regressions and this kind of, because
actually these are all quantitative expectations. The outcome variable here is just distribution of these are just numbers, various numbers by these different firms, these 1,200 firms. And the dependent variable is just a quantitative and just a number for each firm.
So, because I'm confused with the general setting of, or the design of the empirical estimations, because I can see some very high R square in some regression. For example, here I can see 0.72. And some others are as low as 10% or something. So if it is 10%, I can understand. If it is logistic regression, for example, it is very high. I can understand that. But here it is 72%. So it's...
Yeah, I got your point. I guess here, yeah, you are, I think, referring to that one. Yeah, this is the dynamic impact. And actually, as I said, since this is the dynamic impact, the other one is just the cross-sectional one-shot regression in May. Therefore, the R square is here. When it is in panel setting, R squares tend to go low, and here I think that is the case as well. This is just, for example, 2 months after, and we try to capture the impact on the employment. Of course, the variation explained is much lower compared to these cross-sectional regression.
All right, so I'm sorry, I was not good at following of which kind of data is that. So So did you also did some post-regression analysis or diagnostic statistics to assure the reliability of these results?
Actually, we show the randomization works successfully by using some tests. We show these treatment groups are random. That was the first thing that we have shown. We also shown that the sample, these İktisat Yönelim Anketi sample, business standards statistics sample, it is also quite consistent with the representative with the manufacturing universe of manufacturing firms. It is also consistent with that. We have also shown that. And yeah, other than that, I guess we didn't show much diagnostics. Yeah, that was the main thing that we have shown.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for questions. Thank you for questions.
Any other questions? I think you have already mentioned it, but maybe we can underline it. I have a question at this point. We interpreted that the results as there's a tendency towards pessimism, right? With the heightened inflation,
Yeah.
firms has pessimistic, let's say, expectations. Do we interpret it as the other way, like with lower inflation expectations? Will the firms have, let's say, optimistic expectations? Because it may not be the same effect.
Yeah, I agree. It might be asymmetric to some extent. Actually, it's a good idea. Maybe we need to check the asymmetry here. Since the sample size is not too large, 1200 is good enough, but yeah, maybe we need to check that because as you said, the impact might be asymmetric. Of course, these are linear regressions. It works in both ways. If inflation expectation is lower, of course, we interpret it as, they are becoming more and more optimistic with the lower inflation expectations, but the thing is that, of course, in the upward direction and the lower, downward direction, the size of the impact might be different. Therefore, asymmetry analysis might be good here. Actually, that's a good idea. Okay, yeah.
Maybe in a low inflation period for Turkey, it could be checked if you see it.
Yeah. We need to run a separate RCT. Let's see. Maybe we can do such in the near future.
So do we have any other questions or remarks?
Can I add one more question, please, here? What you used the central bank reports to understand. Can you even envisage any kind of other tool to direct or change their expectations rather than central bank reports?
Yeah, you
because
can.
it's important for policy making.
Yeah. There are actually papers that try to understand, how these different communication strategies of central bank impact these inflation expectations. There are such papers. In this one, our aim is to just create these exogenous variation. Therefore, we just gave information regarding the inflation expectations of these professionals of the central bank. But you can give actually any other relevant information that might lead to such outcome, that might lead to a change in the inflation expectations of these firms. Therefore, any relevant information actually works here to some extent. Here, we just gave the very obvious ones, we just expectations of these professionals. But any other idea, any other relevant piece of information should work here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Yeah, I think we are done.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, thank you very much for this detailed and yet clear presentation, because it was really very detailed, but you just give a clear picture to us. Thank you very much. And thank you for accepting our invitation. And we hope to see many papers for this analysis.
Evet, umarım öyle olur.
Evet.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Gerçekten güzel oldu. Sorular da güzel geldi. Umarım makalede anlaşılır bir şekilde anlatmışımdır. Ama genel olarak bu şekildeydi. Benim için de güzel bir deneyim olmuş oldu.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. İstediğiniz zaman kapımız her zaman size açık.
Ben de teşekkür ediyorum. Dediğim gibi çok güzel bir tecrübe oldu. Sizlerle tanışmak da çok benim için güzel oldu. İlk defa tanışmış olduk böylece. Fırsat oldu. Bizim için de tanışmamız için de güzel oldu. Tekrar teşekkür ediyorum böyle bir organizasyon düzenlediğiniz için.
Biz de çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Görüşmek üzere. Güzel makalelerinizi okumak üzere diye.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Oturumumuzu kapatıyorum.
Tekrar
Hocam,
teşekkür ederiz. Hoşçakalın. Sağ olun.
Teşekkür ederiz.
İyi günler, iyi akşamlar.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Görüşürüz.
Görüşmek üzere.